I usually steal from dead filmmakers and artists. That's the thing. I mean, it's dangerous when you go for the living because they'll sue you. No, I think there's a difference. I keep thinking about someone like Steven Spielberg. You know, he's an extraordinary filmmaker, but he, in a sense, I see him more as a copyist. He's like the guy that goes into the big museum and has got his painting, there's a Rembrandt, and he's copying the Rembrandt, and he goes and copies another one. And there's a lot of filmmakers that are like that. I mean, if you actually look at Star Wars, I mean, George Lucas had all this footage from World War II fighting things, and they're copied, but the machinery, of course, is a spaceship and not a fighter. I don't do that. I mean, I watch films, I see a lot of films, but then I never look at them. I don't think about them, but I know they're in here, floating around, and it always surprises me when I'm shooting a film and setting up a shot. I said, oh shit, I know what film that's from. Oh, come on, what's the film? What's the film? Because there's something in the composition that reminds me of an image that I've seen somewhere. So I do it that way. I mean, they're very good at making very precise, they follow the recipes really well. I make a stew that just all the shit is thrown in there. It's cooked for hours and hours, and you can't tell the potato from the carrot by the time it's finished. And so it looks original, but it's all stolen.
En esa situación, ¿y qué tenían los 80 que permitían hacer esas locuras?
I mean, well, being a product, it's not so much the 80s, it was still really coming from the 60s, when America changed, when the studios were in huge trouble, and, you know, Cleopatra had collapsed and took the whole studio down with it. So it was a time when there was a new audience, it was young people, they were all smoking dope and taking acid, and they had money to go to the movies. And so they were interested in new ideas, new adventures, exciting things, looking at a world that is bigger and more surprising. And that's fine. Then they got older, and they got married, and then they wanted to play it safe. And the studios behaved like that as well. Like a new bureaucracy had formed in that time, and it just became more and more boring. In the 60s and 70s, some of the guys running the studios were really interesting characters. They might have been monsters, but they were human beings. And more you saw, they became more corporate. And unfortunately, we have to blame George Lucas and Steven Spielberg for everything, because their kinds of movies were hugely successful. And it was a different way of releasing films, where we released it 2,000 prints, 3,000 prints, and a tsunami would sweep over the nation with posters and everything, and that was it. And those movies were almost sold as if they were important historical events that we all had to be part of. You don't want to miss history. And it started changing the whole attitude. And then what always happens is people, writers, directors, they always start working within what is possible. And what became possible became more predictable, and people took fewer chances. And somehow we end up where we are now, where we generally just do sequels again and again and again. I mean, and I find now it's very depressing. It doesn't mean that you can't succeed. Bill Clinton succeeds despite his lack of talent. Bill is a genius, and he draws, and he can make it himself if he needs to, and that's the key. I mean, if you keep the budget down, I'm going to go on for ages. Awesome. All right. Here's the world now. Zero Theorem, which some of you may or may not get to see tonight, and some of you may or may not want to see tonight, even more to the point. 7 years ago, when we started talking about it, or maybe it was 6 years ago, the budget was $20 million. We made it for $8.5 million, but we made the film. That's the kind of world we're living in. Things can be done cheaper, and that's what you want to do. You want to, if you have ideas, you want to make sure the ideas are not limited by a budget that makes it impossible to make. I think that's the reason. I ran out of steam there. And I have another idea.
No es tanto algo que ocurrió